The inflation rising up to 55%. People stand for hours in queues for food and fuel. About 60,000 Sri Lankans are in danger of zone of harvesting. The government budget reserves are about to run out. The president fled out of the country. On 9th July, Sri Lanka's president and prime minister office have been stormed by civilians during their protests against the government. As known for today, after his short trip around the world, he is currently somewhere in Singapore, where he has arrived on 14th July. The Prime Minister Kraman Singh is currently running the government as a main official. In July 2022, the inflation in the country rose up to 54.6%, while the food inflation rose even up to 81%, chilling deterioration of the economic situation and debt crisis. To this point, the situation was aggravated by the unsuccessful reform in agriculture. About this a little later. In several major cities in Sri Lanka, including its capital, Colombo, there are thousands continue to queue for food and fuel, sometimes clashing with police and military as they wait. Schools have been suspended and fuel has been limited for essential needs. We are now participating in negotiations as a banker country. Therefore, we have to face a more difficult and complicated situation than it was in the previous negotiations. Vikram Singh said in Parliament. To begin with, the claim isn't absolutely correct because, first of all, the country is never going bankrupt. It only can default on its debt payments. Moreover, the country also can default. Instead, only its government. The situation probably will go as usual. Some part of the debt will be remitted, probably the most part. The best example is Argentina in 2012, when the government was able to repay only a sort of its total debts. So what happened there, and what the reasons to Sri Lanka to fail in the economics prison? On 9th November 2019, Gotabaya Rajapaksa has won the president race with 52% and had a short passing of his competitor Sadiq Premadasa. But herefrom started the wars. During the president race, he gave some promises like the most ecological country and some cut taxes for individuals and corporations. In contrast to all others, he tried to implement his promises, but not in the best way as it turned out to be. The government of Sri Lanka under the President Gotabaya Rajapaksa made large taxes that affect government, revenue and fiscal policies, causing the budget deficit dramatically go up. These cuts included increased tax-free thresholds that result in 33.5% in registered taxpayers, reduced VAT by 8%, reducing corporate taxes from 28% to 24%, the abolishment of the pay-as-you-earn tax, and 2% nation-building tax, which financed infrastructure development. At this point, instead of shrinking the untaxable market, implemented instruments made it worse, and it worked against the Sri Lankan government. A massive loss of tax revenue resulting in rating agencies downgrade the sovereign credit rating from policy of status of junk bonds with B level. It has been steadily downgraded until CCC in the start of 2022, meaning the country lost access to foreign markets. In 2021, Jaya Sundar stated that the president Gotabaya Rajapaksa was aware of the loss of revenue but considered it an investment and had no plans to increase taxes during the next 5 years. The dramatic fall in yields follows a decision in last April 2021 made by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to ban all chemical fertilizers in Sri Lanka and move that risk undermining support of the rural voters who are key to his family's grip in Sri Lanka's politics. He pushed the reforms through one single season rather than over several years. I still don't have any clue what was the reason for this move, if only enter in a history as a most ecological president. Yeah, he did enter in history. Also, the ban was rolled back after widespread protests. Only a trickle of chemical fertilizer made it to farms, which will likely lead to an annual drop of 30% in paddy yields nationwide, according to agricultural experts. It in turn will lead to an increase of 30% in the price of food in local area. Agriculture Minister Mahidananda Aluzgamagi told reporters on 1st March that the harvest would be lower in this year. He told that they're gonna pay compensation to 1.1 million farmers in Sri Lanka and told that no one will be suffered after it financially. The total compensation package was about $200 million. That is about $1,000 per family. The country's tourism sector represented of about 1/10 of its total GDP. The sector was negatively affected after 2019 Easter bombing. Actually, it didn't affect that much. And unfortunately, COVID-19 prevented the recovery of tourism sector in Sri Lanka. In 2019, the tourism sector earned about $4.4 billion and represents about 5.6% of GDP. But this dropped to only 0.8% in 2020, with over 40,000 jobs lost to this point. Despite the heavy toll of the COVID-19 pandemic on Sri Lanka's economy and its people, the economy will recover in 2021 as challenges remain. Unfortunately, in 2021, countries continued to hold COVID-19 restrictions. And in 2022, despite the economic recession, Sri Lanka's economy still couldn't be able to recover fully since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The repercussions of 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine are considered to have affected the already sluggish economic conditions of Sri Lanka. The invasion has further worsened the economic environment of Sri Lanka due to Russia being the second biggest largest market to Sri Lanka tea exports and also its tourism sector. Russia and Ukraine are considered to be about 100,000 tourist arrivals per year. As a result, the Ukrainian crisis has put a halt to the path of economic recovery of Sri Lanka, with both tea and tourism sector has been hit hard. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa on Wednesday tweeted that he has sought an assistance from President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, and requested an offer of credit support to import fuel. In such ways, sanctioned country like Russia always finds its partners and call them friends. Sri Lanka's foreign debt increased substantially, going from $11.3 billion in 2005 to about $56.3 billion in 2020. While foreign debt was about 52% of its GDP in 2019, that is considered critical. It rose up to 119% during these 2 years in 2021. In September of last year, the government announced an economic emergency as the falling nation currency exchange rate continued. Inflation rising as a result of high food price and pandemic restrictions in tourism, which further decreased the national income. Sri Lanka then had to fall back into its foreign exchange reserves to pay off government debt, shrinking its reserves from almost $7 billion in 2018 to just about $1.9 billion in March 2022. And that would be not efficient to pay off all the country's foreign debt obligations in 2022. Here was the dramatic decrease in the price of local currency of 50%, weakening from about 200 rupees to 300 rupees for $1. The death was suspected, but it's not the end of the story for Sri Lanka. In early April of this year, the nation reacted as a massive protest calling for President Gotabaya Rajapaksa resignation, sparked in Sri Lanka's capital city, Colombo. In May, pro-government supporters brutally attacked protesters. Subsequently, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, who is the brother of the President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, stepped down and was replaced with former Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe. Recently, the government approved 4-day work week to allow citizens to grow food. As a result, prices continue to shoot up. Food inflation increased up to 57% in May. The international sovereign bond repayment of $1 billion is due to be paid by the government in July 2022. However, country as for today almost ran out of money. Bloomberg reports that Sri Lanka had a total of $8 billion in repayments due in 2022, including both local debt and foreign debt. Now, Western critics of Chinese foreign policy argued that loans to Sri Lanka by the Exim Bank of China to build the Hambantota International Port and the Matala Rajapaksa International Airport, which turned out to be unprofitable white elephants, are examples of debt trap diplomacy that China tries to implement last decade. If you want to know more about this story, please let me know in the comments. The economic crisis has resulted in declines in electricity, fuel and cooking gas consumption, resulting from shortages that of course had a personal effect of country's situation. On 7th March, Finance Minister Basil Rajapaksa argued all government authorities to switch off all street lights and at least up until the end of March 2022 to save more electricity. Nearly 1,000 bakeries have been shut down as a result of shortage in gas. Long queues have formed in last month in front of petrol filling stations. After Sri Lanka's default, it could be difficult times for its nation, especially for its unprotected population. On the place of undervaluatory, there instantly will come investors as soon as the government will find a way to attract them.